down, said he wouldn't leave Egypt.
Yeah, and if they intend to put Mubarak into trial, this would be something very much of some weight. But if they only want to gain time and also to dissipate the momentum of the revolution, which I intend to, we are very much oriented to this explanation. I think this is one of the tricks which are now introduced to the Egyptian scene.
So this, you think then, is perhaps just a message that the authorities in place right now, the government in place, is trying to give the protesters who've been taken to the streets of Tahrir Square, even after Mubarak stood down, to tell them, yes, something will be done?
Yes, I think so, because very simply, if they want to make something, they have to remove the government head by Mr. Shafiq. He is one of the time we are talking about the ban of travel of President Mubarak. So I think that it's not going together. This is some paradoxical.
Okay, thank you very much for speaking to us. Abdullah Al-Shal, professor, joining us there on the line from Cairo in Egypt and commenting on the move by the public prosecutor in Egypt to place a travel ban on former President Hosni Mubarak. Now, there, AlJazeera is a town in the east of Libya, which is now also under the control of anti-government forces. Let's speak to AlJazeera's Tony Bertley, who joins us live from AlJazeera. Tony, give us a sense of what's been happening there, of the situation, the mood, the atmosphere in AlJazeera.
Well, it's a very good mood, one of celebration, of course, but I'm a little bit further down the road. I'm about 100 kilometers down the road further west, heading towards Sirte. And this is perhaps the last area of control. The area is called Braga, and behind me you see a checkpoint here, and this is the last main checkpoint. You've got another 40 kilometers of opposition-held territory, and if I walk round, you can see this vast, empty stretch of road going way into the distance, and this is basically the control of the opposition. Beyond that, you've got like 20 kilometers of no man's land, and then you've got the area of control of pro-Gaddafi forces. We understand from the people here, the committees here, that pro-Gaddafi forces have been coming in and making lightning raids and attacking now and again. So there is an element of danger around here and a lot of uncertainty. Now, this is a very important position because behind me you will see the entrance to the Sirte oil company, one of the main oil companies in Libya. And behind that you have the tanks, the refining tanks, and you have pipelines which are going to the oil fields about 100 kilometers from here. And there's great fears that the final act of retribution by Gaddafi could be a strike on the oil fields, pretty much like Saddam's forces did in the first Gulf War in Kuwait. So there's a lot of concern here. There's been a lot of activity, and still things have not decided. So that shows you the situation is still fluid, because down the road in Sirte, you've got the heartland of Gaddafi, his hometown, right, and you've got something like 4,000 loyal and well-armed fighters. So this is not over in the east so far.
All right, let me just make a quick correction, Tony. You are, in fact, in Braga and not AlJazeera, Braga being 250 kilometers from Sirte. Are there any plans where you are, Tony, about possibly heading towards Sirte, which, as you said, is a stronghold of Gaddafi?
When you talk to people here, they say that's in the hands of the military. And I think the military in the main positions in Tobruk, in Benghazi, and down the road here, they're all talking about the possibilities. They're also being told that to wait just to see what happens, because there is still a hope that Gaddafi will go peacefully and there will not be bloodshed. But there are all kinds of plans in the air, a lot of speculation. But the problem is Sirte. Sirte is it cuts the road. And to go through Sirte would be would take quite a big army offensive. So, and that would be mean a lot of casualties. So I think they want to avoid that. The other way is going around the desert, but his pro-Gaddafi forces are holding areas in the desert also. So it's not straightforward. It's very complicated. But I think actually the pressing things at the moment are food and medicine that these people need. For example, this area had something like 30,000 people living here. About 10,000 have gone. A lot of foreign workers from the oil companies have gone also. But they're down to the bare minimum of food now and medicines. They need to get the food chain going again, and they're hoping that Benghazi and Tobruk will help that. But at the moment, they're starting to feel the pinch.
And how are they filling the power vacuum there in Braiga, Tony? I mean, Gaddafi is no longer in control, then who is?
A series of committees have set up now to look at defence, to look at food, to look at all kinds of aspects of daily life now. The schools are not open. Here, it's a bit of a dead zone, and AlJazeera also there's a problem because all the shops are still closed and people are suffering there. You know, considering the vast amount of oil wealth that Libya made, it's very surprising just how poor people are in this area. That wealth did not filter down to the people on the streets, so they're now suffering a great deal. But they have military committees, they have committees, they're trying the best they can to get some organisation. I think there was some kind of concern that the old faces, if you like, of the old guard from Gaddafi are taking over the new positions for the new Libya, and that's not going down well in some quarters. But of course these are interim measures, so it will change in time. But at the moment they're getting on with life the best they can.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony Bertley, reporting there live from eastern Libya in the city of Braiga. Thanks, Tony. Let's now return to that breaking news story that we were mentioning earlier, and that's Egypt, of course, and the Prosecutor General there issuing a travel ban against former President Hosni Mubarak and his family. Hosni Mubarak is now the most high-profile and most senior official of the previous regime who has had a travel ban imposed on him along with his family and several ministers. Let's speak more about this to Ibrahim Sharkir from the Brookings Center here in Doha, who's been in the studio with us throughout the morning. How significant do you think is this move from the public prosecutor in Egypt?
It is quite significant, and there are many reasons why it makes it so important and makes it so essential at this particular point, because we have to keep in mind that there has been 1 million demonstration the other day in Egypt, and there has been some talks about possible what was called anti-revolution or an opposite revolution. So this kind of measure is taken to assure the public and to assure the protesters that things are progressing and the military is in control, and there is no return of the previous regime to power.
So clearly the regime is trying to show that they are taking the demands made by the protesters very seriously. So assets freeze, travel ban. What do you think is the next step? Could we see possibly Mubarak being pursued for crimes that were committed under his rule?
That is still early to talk about this, because I think it's we still need to see more actions being taken, and in particular we need to see that others from the close individuals to the president are being tried before we get to that point. But at this point, the most important thing is that to know that we have got to this point, and there are serious issues that the regime will have to deal with, because we're talking about several billions of dollars that have been, that they're at least unknown, what the fate of this amount of money and the assets that there are outside. So we are getting there, and I believe the judiciary will have to deal with this issue sooner or later.
So you're saying that this is a first positive step anyway, that the judiciary in place has done?
It is definitely a positive step because it first of all, it assures the protesters that there is no return of the previous regime to power in Egypt, and
But will it be, though, enough to appease the protesters? We've seen, even on Friday, last Friday, demonstrators again in Tahrir Square. They have indeed tried to make a number of gestures, constitutional amendments and so on. Is that going to be enough to appease the demonstrators?
That is not the only thing. It is significant, it's important, but there will have to be much more than that in order to satisfy the protesters and to show more significant, more serious gestures as well. And especially is the one that the protesters and the public, they're waiting to hear about is about the next elections, because it's important to realize that the army now is in charge. the army doesn't get too comfortable in their place and then stay for a long period of time. So I see that the protesters are now in Egypt. The public and the revolution gave already about 6 months. I think they can take up to 6 months where the army is in control. But beyond 6 months, unless there are serious and steps are taken to address the election and the transitional government, then the army will have to have a tough job on their hands to deal with.
All right, we are talking about Egypt's general prosecutor imposing a travel ban on former President Hosni Mubarak and his family. Let's now speak to AlJazeera's Ayman Mohildeen, who joins us on the line from Cairo. Ayman, just tell us about the significance of this move.
Well, it certainly has a great deal of significance on multiple levels, because if you really look at the trajectory of legal proceedings that have been taking place against former senior officials within the Mubarak regime, you can get a sense of what we can perhaps expect coming down the line. Now, certainly when you look at what has happened with, let's say, the former Minister of Interior, who's expected to stand trial on March 5th, many of these individuals began with the very same process, in the sense that the first concrete step that is taken by the general prosecutor is a ban on travel and financial assets frozen. That is immediately followed with an investigation, perhaps then sometimes even a detention for up to 15 days, as we saw with other senior officials. And then once that investigation is concluded, it actually then goes into legal proceedings with a concrete set of indictments that are presented against officials. Now, all of these officials, the former ministers and some senior businessmen that we were talking about, all really went through the same process, in the sense that they started off by having these travel bans imposed on them. They had their financial assets frozen, and then they had investigations launched into their wrongdoings, followed by indictments. Now, the only official so far to be charged with any illegal wrongdoing is that of the Ministry of Interior. But for the president, the former president rather, for him to now have this travel ban imposed on him, to have his assets domestically in Egypt now frozen, certainly a very significant development, and really trying to send the signal that the general prosecutor is being very robust in the short time that he has had in investigating the crimes, or perhaps the allegations of crimes against elements of the former regime.
And this is also clearly a move, Ayman, by the military council to perhaps appease the anti-Mubarak protesters, the pro-democracy activists who've been demonstrating continuously in Tahrir Square. Is this going to be enough, you think, for them?
Well, from a legal point of view, it is not necessary that the military has given the okay for the general prosecutor to have ordered this travel ban. What is really interesting in terms of the political dynamic that is at play here is that the general prosecutor in the last several weeks, without a doubt, under pressure from the protesters and the revolution's demands that these elements of the regime be brought to justice, has really become more robust compared to what he was when he was serving under President Hosni Mubarak. It is the same individual who is serving under the current Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. But in this period, he has been very aggressive in launching these investigations and imposing these travel bans. Now, whether or not he did that with the approval of the military would be very interesting, and perhaps we'll learn more about that in the coming hours and days. But undoubtedly, the fact that he has the power and he is exercising that power will certainly be as a positive sign to many in the post-Mubarak era, who want to see a separation of powers and many of these elements of the regime brought to justice.
Okay, Ayman Mohildeen in Cairo, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Let's now speak to Khaled Fahmy, a professor at the American University in Cairo. Thank you very much for speaking to us. First, if I could get just your reaction to this move by the public prosecutor. Do you think this is a positive step?
Yes, I think it is a significant step. It remains to be seen, however, if this will placate people on the streets who have been raising their expectations and their demands and their pressure on the military from day to day. I mean, we have to realize that basically we're seeing three centers or three contending powers or centers of power in Egypt now. We have the old regime, and at its pinnacle is President Mubarak, and now we have seen very clearly that the new, the military, in a sense, is burning of any kinds of links or bridges that it had with that older regime. But secondly, we have the military itself, which is trying to build its own legitimacy. We're talking about the high brass, these senior generals of the Egyptian army, the heads of the different branches of the Egyptian military, who have been basically running the country, who paradoxically were all obviously appointed by the former president, and now they're basically casting their lot against him. And thirdly, we have the people on the street who have not yet been casting any serious doubts about the military, but they are definitely against Mubarak and the entire regime.
But this is a process that could, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but as a correspondent was